Every Thursday for 11 years, Hector Reyes walked into my warehouse and asked the same question. How's the Empire? And every Thursday I said the same thing back. Still standing. 300 and some times. Neither of us ever meant anything by it. Until the Thursday he meant everything by it and didn't know it. I want to tell you I handled what came next with some kind of dignity. I want to tell you I saw it coming. The signs, the pattern, all of it. I didn't see any of it coming. My son-in-law had been stealing from my business for 26 months, and a plumber who doesn't even know my daughter's name is the one who told me. $141,000. 26 months. 11 phone calls to get it back. That's the whole story, more or less. Let me tell you the less. If you're new here, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe to Familix's Revenge. It helps me keep sharing stories like this one. Now, back to the Thursday. Kowalski Plumbing Supply. I opened it in 2004 with a lease I probably couldn't afford and a handshake from a vendor who took a chance on me. Not glamorous. We sell pipe fittings, copper tubing, gasket compound. The kind of things that end up inside walls where nobody sees them. 2.1 million a year by the time any of this happened. I built the first 2 storage shelves myself. One wall took 3 weekends, because I kept measuring wrong. My knees were fine then. Marlene ran the front counter for 11 years. Called me, D, the whole time. I never corrected her. Not because I liked it, I didn't especially, but because correcting it after the first week felt rude. And after the first year felt impossible. And after 11 years felt like it would confuse us both. The swingline stapler on my desk I've had since 1998. I refill it myself. In 26 years I have never once run out of staples at my own desk. I don't know why I'm telling you that. I know why I'm telling you that. Gary Reardon married my daughter Sarah in 2016. Charming guy. Good at parties, good with the nieces, easy in a room the way some people just are. I gave him a job in 2019, when his own situation dried up. Not because I thought he was the right fit. Because he was family and he needed work and that's what you do. He was competent. Not exceptional, but competent. I handled the vendor accounts myself for 22 years straight. Then Gary's father died in the spring of 2022, and 3 weeks after the funeral I gave Gary full vendor access. The password, the accounts, everything. I didn't audit once in the 26 months after that. He was grieving. I wasn't going to stand over his shoulder with a spreadsheet. Karen's sister Paulette was always at the table. Holidays, Sundays, the kind of dinners that happen because someone has to host them. At Thanksgiving 2018 she told me, quietly, in the kitchen while Karen was cutting something, "You've been so good to this family, Dennis. Gary is lucky." I thanked her, poured more wine, thought she meant it. She probably did at the time. I've been thinking about that sentence for a while now. Hector Reyes. Every Thursday. How's the Empire? I'd say, still standing. 300 and some exchanges. He doesn't know my daughter's name. I don't know his wife's. We have a ritual, and that was always enough. The Thursday he walked in and mentioned a supplier called GR Supply LLC started like every other Thursday. His order the usual. And then, how's the Empire? Still standing. Same as always. Except Hector didn't leave right away that Thursday. He was pulling on his jacket when he half turned back. The way people do when they almost forgot something. Hey, you know a supplier called GR Supply LLC? Cold called me last week. Offering your pipe stock at 8% under your price. Same SKUs, same specs. Figured that was weird. I said I appreciated him telling me. He said sure, did I need anything else? I said no. He left. I stood at the counter for a moment. Walked to my office. Left the door open. Marlene walked past once, twice. Neither of us said anything. I sat there for 19 minutes. I know it was 19 because I looked at the clock when Hector left and looked again. When I finally picked up the phone to call Phil. 19 minutes of nothing. Just the ceiling fan and the smell of the place and a name I already knew the answer to. Phil called back in 2 days. His office. Short-sleeve dress shirt, same as always. Spreadsheet open on his screen. GR Supply LLC, 26 months. $141,000. Vendor payments redirected through invoices Gary generated himself. Consistent formatting, consistent amounts, systematic. Phil finished talking and looked at me and waited. I asked him how bad it made me look as an owner. He paused. First time in 14 years I'd seen Phil pause before answering. and said honestly, pretty bad. I said at least his handwriting was consistent across all 26 months. Phil didn't laugh. I picked up the folder, told him to send the full report. Left, I drove to the hardware store and bought weather stripping I didn't need. Didn't call my lawyer for 11 days. I kept thinking about the password. I gave him that password 3 weeks after his father's funeral because auditing a grieving man felt cold. I thought I was being generous. I was being generous. I was also handing him the keys and looking the other way for 2 years. Both things were true. I'd only understood one of them until Phil showed me that spreadsheet. The first thing I did was the wrong thing. I didn't decide to drive to Gary's house that evening. I was heading home, took a wrong turn that wasn't a wrong turn, and found myself parked across from his driveway at 4:30 in the afternoon. His car was there, kitchen light on. I sat for 11 minutes. Didn't knock, didn't call. Just sat. I told myself I had nothing solid, a plumber's second-hand tip and a sick feeling. You don't go to your son-in-law's door with that. I kept telling myself this until I believed it enough to drive away. What I didn't know was that Paulette had seen my truck from the window. She called Gary. Gary spent the next day on the phone with every vendor in his redirect chain, telling them Kowalski Supply was under new management and transitioning its vendor relationships. That much I found out later. What I found out when I actually reached vendor number 3 stopped me in a different way entirely. The vendor said Gary had mentioned something else too, that Dennis Kowalski had been having some memory trouble lately, that if they got conflicting information directly from me, they shouldn't be surprised. 20 years I'd done business with that man. Gary spent one phone call making sure he'd doubt me. I drove home. Filled the parking lot pothole at 9:45 that night. Karen watched from the kitchen window. Didn't come out. I understood why. I wouldn't have known what to say either. Tuesday I called the first vendor myself. No script, no preparation. Got 30 seconds in and couldn't finish the sentence. Said something about supply chain concerns and hung up. Called back, left a vague voicemail that accomplished nothing. Phil cleaned it up later. His words, not mine. I drove to his parking lot and sat for 18 minutes before calling him back. I need to send formal written notification, I said. From my letterhead, to every vendor in Gary's redirect chain, that GR Supply LC is not an authorized Kowalski affiliate. Phil said that he could do. 2 words. That he could do. Marlene gave her notice that same week. Her mother was ill. She was moving to be closer. 11 years. She called me, one last time when she left, and I gave her a card with a gift card inside, and said safe travels, and she cried. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I said it again. Safe travels. She left. I sat in my office for an hour doing nothing that had anything to do with Gary. The temp who replaced her missed 2 vendor confirmation callbacks. Phil had to resend those letters. He didn't complain. I could tell he was annoyed. Life kept moving during all of it. That's the part nobody warns you about. Phil recommended the industry trade board, more authoritative than direct vendor calls, harder for Gary to intercept. He said it would take longer and be more public. I said I knew. He wrote it down. That was that. Phil drafted the trade board complaint in 4 days. I signed it at his desk, used his pen, which was one of those cheap click, top ones that leaves a faint line. I picked up his old Casio calculator while he was collating the pages, the same model he's had on his desk for as long as I've been his client. Turned it over, put it back. Phil asked if I wanted to attend the hearing myself. I told him to go in my place. He said okay and wrote it down, and I watched the pages feed through his fax machine one at a time, slow and certain, and thought about the fact that Gary was probably at a family dinner that night making someone laugh. I told Karen that week that Gary wouldn't be coming into the business anymore. She was at the stove. I said business reasons. She turned and looked at me for a few seconds. Karen has this thing where she asks one question and then waits, doesn't push, doesn't follow up. She asked why. I said business reasons again. She looked at me a moment longer than felt comfortable, then said okay and turned back to what she was cooking. I refilled my water glass. We ate dinner. She didn't believe me. I knew she didn't believe me. Neither of us said anything else about it. 2 days later Phil called. He'd pulled the LLC registration, as part of his supplementary research. The registered agent on file for GR Supply LLC was Paulette Reardon. Same address as the house I'd co-signed. She hadn't just known, she'd signed the documents. That's not proximity, that's participation. I read the address twice, said it out loud once. Phil watched me do it and didn't comment. I asked whether Karen needed to be involved given the co-sign overlap. Phil said adjacent wasn't the same as legally implicated. I said then we keep it legal. We kept it legal. I left Phil's office and drove to the warehouse. 10 at night. I filled the parking lot pothole, it had come back. Same as every spring, same as it always does. I fill it knowing it'll come back. That's just the arrangement we have, that pothole in me. Karen's sister had signed the papers. Karen's only sister, since their parents died. I knew what I was going to do. I knew what I was going to have to leave alone. Those were two different things, and that night they both felt about the same weight. The trade board hearing was on a Wednesday. I was at the warehouse. Hector came in at his usual time. How's the Empire? Still standing. And I filled his order and he left and Phil called at 2:15. The ruling came down. GR Supply LC lost its industry certification. Phil said there was a civil recovery path for the remainder if I wanted to pursue it. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for 4 days. On the 5th day I called him back and said no. Let it go. He said okay, then he put his pen down. Looked at me for a moment, not at his spreadsheet, at me. Just for a moment. Then he nodded once and picked the pen back up. In 14 years that was the closest Phil ever came to saying well done. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Gary's vendor access dried up over the following weeks. Suppliers stopped returning calls. Orders stopped processing. The revenue stream that had been quietly feeding off my business just stopped. He missed 2 mortgage payments on the co-signed property. The bank called me as co-signer. I referred them to Gary and had my name removed from the co-sign the same week. Legally cleanly done. I never spoke to Gary about any of it directly. There was no scene. That was the point. About 4 weeks after the ruling, Hector came in on a Thursday and mentioned, casual, same way he mentions everything, that some supplier had been cold calling him a while back and had gone quiet. GR Supply something, he said. Hair 1 week, gone the next. Happens in this business. He didn't know it was Gary. I didn't tell him. I said, yeah, it does happen. He placed his order. How's the Empire? Still standing, Hector. Still standing. Paulette called Karen on a Sunday. I wasn't there for the call, but I know what was said because Karen came home an hour later and sat across from me at the kitchen table without taking her coat off. She has one question. That's her rule. She asks one thing and waits for the real answer. She looked at me and asked what I'd known. I counted 4 seconds. 5. The joke was there, same place it always is, same shape. I could feel it forming. I let it go. I knew enough, I said. She asked why I hadn't told her. I didn't have an answer that was going to help either of us, so I gave her the only true one. I didn't know how. She put her hand over mine on the table. That was all. That night I went to the supply room and reorganized PVC fittings by diameter. Nothing needed reorganizing. I did it anyway. Karen found me there at midnight and brought a glass of water and went back to bed without saying anything. I stood under the ceiling fan, the one I'd fixed the week before, finally replaced the blade after 3 years of meaning to. Silent now. I listened to where the sound used to be. 6 weeks later there was a family dinner. Gary was there. He worked the room the way he always did, made the nieces laugh, stayed light. After dinner he caught me in the kitchen, while Karen was getting dessert. He started talking about new opportunities, other possibilities, and I could see from the second sentence where he was heading. He wanted a loan. I let him finish building toward it. Then I said, 26 months, Gary. Same formatting on every invoice. Very consistent. Gary went still, completely still. He knew what those words were. He knew where they came from. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said I could give him Phil's number. That Phil works with a lot of small operators. Gary said nothing. I picked up the dessert plates and carried them to the table and sat down and passed one to Karen. Under the table she found my hand and held it. She didn't know exactly what had just happened in that kitchen. She knew something had. We didn't say anything. I poured her water. She said thank you. That was the whole of it. Gary stopped coming to family dinners. Not all at once. First he was busy. Then he had something else on. Then his name just stopped appearing in group texts. Sarah told Karen they were taking some time. Nobody asked what that meant. Paulette still came to the dinners Karen hosted. Quieter now. She and I sat at opposite ends of the table, and Karen moved between us the way she always had, like that was just the shape of the room. Phil called 4 months after the ruling. The civil recovery check had cleared 96,000 of the 141. The remaining 45 Gary had already spent. Phil asked if I wanted to pursue the balance in civil court. I said no. He asked why. I said because I know what I know. And Gary knows I know. And that was going to have to be enough. Phil said okay. Short sleeve dress shirt, written down, done. I don't think about the 45,000 most days. Some days I do. I don't know if Karen ever asked Paulette directly about any of it. I didn't ask Karen. That's my rule. I don't ask what she handles on her own. I'm trying to understand that this works both ways. Trying being the operative word. Marlene sent a Christmas card from Tosin. Signed it, D. One last time, probably knowing I'd notice, probably knowing I wouldn't say anything about it. I put it on my desk next to the swingline stapler. The temp who replaced her turned out to be decent. Not Marlene. Not close to Marlene. But decent, which is what you need most days. Phil's mother passed in 2019. I didn't know until 2 years after. I've been asking him one personal question per visit since I found out. He answers briefly. Neither of us acknowledges that this is new. It is new. Phil turns 53 in March. I know that now. Didn't know it before any of this happened. It's a Thursday, 6:38 in the morning. I'm putting on my jacket by the front door when Karen comes into the kitchen. She doesn't say anything. She pours coffee from the pot she made. She was up before me, which is new, and hands it to me. I look at it for a second. I take it. I walk to the warehouse with the coffee. Drink it standing at the front door before I go in. Stay outside 1 minute longer than usual. The parking lot is quiet. The pothole is filled. I got to it last week. Cold patch, same as always. It'll come back in spring. That's just how it goes. I go in at 6:40. Walk the floor. The vendor terminal is dark. The ceiling fan is still. I replaced the blade in October. Finally, after 3 years of meaning to. No sound. I pass it and notice the silence where the tick used to be. The way you notice a word missing from a sentence you've read 1,000 times. Hector's truck pulls into the lot at 8:15. I can see it through the front window. Thursday. His order. Same as always. Still standing. If you've been watching Familix's Revenge and stories like this one means something to you, a like and subscribe genuinely helps me keep sharing them. Now, back to the Thursday, except this one's just a Thursday. That's the whole point.